You thought you were feeding the birds. The birds have been studying you. Over 57 million people across North America fill a backyard feeder at some point each year. Together, they distribute roughly 500,000 tons of supplemental seed annually, enough to visibly alter the behavior of entire species across a continent. That number alone changes the question. This is not a private exchange between you and a sparrow. It is one of the largest uncontrolled behavioral experiments ever run on wild animals, conducted by ordinary people without knowing it. Research published in Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B found that birds visiting residential feeders for 6 weeks or more begin shifting their foraging routes, territory behavior, and in some species, their stress hormone cycles immeasurably and lastingly. What is happening to those birds? Inside their brains, inside their social lives, inside the geometry of your yard, is something most people who fill a feeder every morning have never been told. Stay with this. If that sense of unease, the feeling that something familiar is hiding something surprising, is why you're here, subscribe now. This channel exists to find exactly that kind of gap between what most people assume and what the research shows. This is not a channel about bird watching as a hobby. It is a channel about behavior, the hidden architecture of what living things do when no one thinks anyone is watching, and what the science reveals when someone finally looks. Every claim here is drawn from peer-reviewed journals, documented field studies, and published behavioral research. The goal is precision, not dramatization, because precision, it turns out, is what produces genuine surprise. The most visible and immediate change when you begin feeding birds daily is also the most straightforward. Birds start arriving more often and at more predictable times. Most people attribute this to hunger. The actual driver is more specific. What drives that regularity is spatial memory, a faculty governed by a brain structure called the hippocampus, the same region that encodes navigation and location recall in mammals. In seed-catching songbirds like black-capped chickadees, it is proportionally enlarged. That enlargement is not cosmetic. It represents computational infrastructure, the neurological capacity to store, retrieve, and update precise spatial coordinates of food sources distributed across a complex and constantly changing landscape. Your feeder does not register in the bird's mind as a general direction or a neighborhood. It is encoded as a specific coordinate as precise as a GPS pin. In a spatial network, the bird updates on every successful visit. Picture a black-capped chickadee on a November morning. Before the frost has lifted from your roof, before you have reached for the coffee, it is already tracing a cached route, and your feeder is stop 3. When you forget to refill the feeder for a week, the birds still arrive. They circle, they wait, they check the same spot twice. That is not optimism, it is a precise memory running against contradictory evidence. This is why Cornell Lab of Ornithology, through decades of feeder watch data, has confirmed that birds at residential feeders do not simply habituate. They calibrate, updating their spatial expectations against daily reality season by season. But spatial memory is only the beginning. Within weeks of consistent feeding, something more complex emerges, something that surprised even the researchers who were specifically looking for it. The birds stop tracking the feeder alone. They begin tracking you, your schedule, your daily patterns, the specific timing of your morning movements. The feeder becomes secondary. Your predictability becomes the primary environmental cue. A 2019 study in PLOS One by researchers at the University of Exeter found that great tits, common European garden birds, shifted their foraging window based on human activity timing. Not temperature, not light, human schedule, which means that at roughly 6:47 in the morning, 3 minutes before you typically open the back door, the birds are already arriving. Not because they smell the seed, because they have memorized your schedule more precisely than you have. This is not trivial. The birds are not simply waiting for food. They are reading the pattern of your life and making predictions about it. Your reliability has become part of their environmental model of what is safe and predictable. The counterintuitive agent is your neighbor. Studies show that birds reorganize their social feeding hierarchy, who feeds first, who waits at the edge, based on the reliability of nearby feeders, including those they cannot see. When your neighbor's feeder ran empty last October, the birds at your feeder felt that absence within days. Their position shifted, their queuing order changed. The neighborhood's food network had been redrawn, and they updated accordingly. The birds are not responding to your feeder as an isolated resource. They are modeling the entire food landscape of your block, a dynamic network that updates every time conditions change, including when a trusted human becomes unreliable. There is a third dimension to what your feeder creates, one almost no one who fills a feeder thinks about. By concentrating birds predictably, you have simultaneously created an optimal hunting environment for everything that preys on them. A sharp-shinned hawk has been watching your feeder from a perch 50 meters away for 3 weeks. It has been learning individual visit patterns, when specific birds arrive, how long they stay, which direction they face while feeding. It strikes during the interval of lowest vigilance, between a sparrow's second and third daily visit, when attention is at its minimum. In 4 seconds the bird is gone, there is no sound, there is no trace. Below a feeder, in the dead grass at the post's base, something with extraordinary patience has been waiting since before dawn. The American Bird Conservancy estimates that free-roaming cats kill up to 4 billion birds annually in the US. Most kills happen near concentrated food sources at dusk or before dawn, which is precisely what you have built. The prey is carried away before morning. The evidence dissolves before you have a reason to look. You built a predictable resource. Predictability in the wild is always information. Every species capable of exploiting a consistent, concentrated food source has deep biological reasons to pay close attention to where you are and when you fill it. So when the sparrow population at your feeder gradually thins in midwinter, when the dozen birds of October become 6 in December, you were right to sense something had changed. The absence is real and it was not random. Memory drew them in and organized their routes. Social dynamics shaped their hierarchy. Predators refined the population, one invisible event at a time. What you experienced as simple generosity was, in ecological terms, a significant ongoing event. But none of that has yet touched the deeper question, a question about what the birds know, not about the feeder, but about you. When researchers began pursuing it seriously, the answer was stranger than any of them had anticipated. For most of the 20th century, ornithology operated on a comfortable assumption that birds were driven primarily by instinct, sophisticated, yes, capable of impressive feats, but not individually aware of specific humans in any personalized cognitive sense. That assumption broke down with corvids. Researchers across institutions in North America and New Zealand demonstrated that crows and ravens could identify individual human faces, retain that identification across years, and transmit information socially to other birds. What made this finding so significant was not just the retention span, but the social transmission mechanism. The knowledge moved through the flock horizontally, bird to bird, without the need for every individual to have direct experience. The question researchers are now pursuing is more unsettling. If corvids build detailed cognitive models of the humans in their lives, face, schedule, reliability, what are the birds at your feeder building? And what happens when you stop? The most rigorous answer begins in 2010. Ornithologist John Marsluff at the University of Washington published research in PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, proving that American crows retained individual memory of specific human faces across years. In the study, researchers wearing masks used during crow banding were dive-boomed and scolded across the entire campus. This included birds who had never personally witnessed the original capture. The information had been transmitted through the flock socially. The masks became permanent danger signals associated with threat across years and multiple crow generations, not because every crow had the experience, but because the flock shared the information the way a community shares important news. Marsluff's team followed the study for years. The response intensity did not diminish. If anything, it spread, propagating through younger birds who had inherited the social knowledge from older members who remembered the original event. A 2018 study in animal cognition found that European robins showed measurably reduced cortisol, the primary stress hormone, around humans who had fed them consistently for 3 or more weeks, compared to unfamiliar humans in the same outdoor environment. Cornell Lab of Ornithology's Project FeederWatch, running continuously since 1987 across more than 10,000 North American monitoring sites, has documented population-level behavioral shifts in more than 150 species correlated directly with long-term supplemental residential feeding. Migration overwintering ranges in some species have shifted measurably northward over 4 decades. A shift partially attributed to the extension of viable food availability created by residential feeders into previously inhospitable winter habitat. None of this proves that the birds at your feeder experience anything resembling affection. What it proves is quieter and stranger, that they build an accurate working model of who you are and consult it every morning. It must be said clearly, the strongest evidence here comes from corvids, crows, ravens, jays. The degree to which these findings extend to common garden songbirds at the average backyard feeder remains a genuinely open research question. Anecdotal reports of birds that seem to recognize individual feeders, returning to a specific person even when feeder placement changes, are abundant. But anecdote and controlled evidence are different things, and the distance between them matters. Some researchers argue that supplemental feeding creates dependency, that birds relying heavily on feeders may be less resilient to feeder disruption or habitat loss. Others find minimal evidence for dependency in the population studied. The debate is live. The open question science has not resolved. Does consistency create behavioral flexibility, new responses to new information, or does it reinforce existing instinctual templates? That line is murkier than biology once assumed. Here is the practical truth. When you fill a feeder day after day, you are becoming a stable, trusted element in another creature's cognitive map of the world. Not metaphor, that is measurable neuroscience. The birds at your feeder are not ornaments. They are not incidental visitors. They are active participants in an exchange that has reshaped their behavior, altered their stress physiology, and inserted you, specifically you, into their understanding of the world. And here is the stranger truth beneath that one. You thought you were being generous. What you did not know is that the birds had begun, with extraordinary precision, building a detailed model of who you are. Your face, your schedule, the specific sound of your morning. They were storing it, refining it, using it quietly, without ceremony, without you ever knowing that something was watching and noting and learning the shape of your days. You thought you were feeding the birds. It turns out the birds have been learning you. And they started on the very first morning you stepped outside with something in your hand and looked up. Tell me in the comments, do you feed birds? What species comes to your feeder most? Sparrows, chickadees, crows, something else? Where is it? Window, yard, balcony? And how long have you been filling it? I read every comment personally.